I would like to start by welcoming all of you to IRI and to this exciting event, Mapping Burma's Democratic Trajectory. As many of you know, our Burma program is one of our oldest and most substantial programs here at IRI. The Institute has worked to support democracy in Burma since 1992 and has witnessed a remarkable change from a country ruled by a military junta which violently oppressed political and ethnic opposition and kept the country internationally isolated and economically stagnant, to a country that has released political prisoners and relaxed media restrictions and made even modest progress on reforming political and economic institutions. In response to Burma's nascent democratic opening, IRI began conducting work in country in February of 2012. This work builds upon 2 decades of support to Burma's pro-democracy movements from the Thai-Burma border, working with civil society and political parties. Over the last year, IRI has worked in 11 of 14 states and regions, reaching more than 2,000 political party and civil society stakeholders, assisting them in developing their knowledge and skills to better represent and advocate the views of ordinary citizens in Burma's political process. The public opinion poll that we're going to share with you today is IRI's first national survey in Burma, and it's funded by our friends at USAID. Information, as our survey highlights, remains a relatively rare commodity in Burma. Burma now faces a pivotal 18 months before its next election, but while most of the focus tends to be on key political figures, not enough attention is given to the opinions of what ordinary Burmese citizens think and feel. This survey is an effort to redress that balance by providing a comprehensive analysis of attitudes regarding the economic and social and political landscape. It examines attitudes towards democracy, the current reform agenda, government performance, and the sentiments towards the 2015 elections. This is information not so much from political leaders, but from people themselves, those who must decide Burma's democratic future. While there is no single map guiding Burma's democratic progress, we look forward to hearing the panelists' views on the opportunities and the challenges that Burma and the international community are likely to face in the next year and a half. I want to thank all of you for coming, particularly our distinguished panelists. And now I would like to introduce Paul Randolph, Director of the Office of East Asian Affairs for the Asia Bureau at USAID, to provide some further remarks. Paul?
Thanks, Mark. It's really a great day for USA to be a part of this event this morning. This idea of a survey and polling work actually started emerging almost 2 years ago as the recent events in Burma at that time were starting to show a democratic move and opportunities to engage in a major reform effort in the country. So USAID is very proud to be a supporter of this survey, and the first of its kind in Burma. And as part of our initiative that President Obama announced in November 2012, the U.S.-Burma Partnership for Democracy, Peace, and Prosperity, this work that IRI is doing, plus the work of our other partners in the democracy and human rights fields, is a major component to our initiatives as we reestablished our presence in Burma and continue to work towards the elections in 18 months. We all know that one-day election is not the benchmark for democracy. It's a hard road to gradually work towards, and I think this survey that we're going to hear about today helps show where Burma is, a snapshot in time, where Burma is today or just a few months ago, and public opinion, and that's going to help inform various democratic actors and supporters from civil society, political parties, the government, et cetera, about where exactly Burma stands and where is it going on the road to democracy. We're very excited. I mean, this is one part of the support that we're providing to IRI. They also are working in developing political parties as well as civil society's engagement in the upcoming election process, as well as in the broader democracy reform agenda in country, to have greater accountability of government actors, civil society, political parties, and others play a major part. And IRI has been on the ground now for close to 18 months. Helping support those efforts, and we're looking forward to hearing the results of this survey. Thank you.
If I may introduce myself, still maybe a little bit, is there feedback from our mics? Maybe if IT could turn down the volume a little bit, that would be helpful. My name is Julia Belibakovic, and I'm IRI's Regional Director for Asia, and I wanted to, this morning, introduce the panelists that we will have to follow the presentation of the poll findings, and also just tell you how this event should go. So first of all, we have actually right now calling in our pollster and country director from Burma, who will actually present to you the poll findings. Our pollster is currently an independent pollster, Robert Varsalone, but he has someone who has worked for IRI for a long time prior to this position, and he served for us as country director in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, only tough places. Then he came back home and is now serving with us in the capacity of independent pollster. Rob is someone also who has not only conducted polling for IRI and, has done a lot of presentations for an analysis of the data, but he has also trained people in the field. He has trained poll interviewers. He has trained political parties and NGOs to understand the data. So he comes with that background to IRI, and from that perspective, he'll be presenting the data to you today. And Steve Seam, our country director for Burma, has been actually the one who's opened this office in Burma and with the program from the very beginning inside the country. And before that, he's actually worked with IRI in Pakistan, Kazakhstan, and Indonesia, and now he's holding this position. After they present the data, the findings, if you wouldn't mind, what I would like to do is have our panelists discuss the findings and some of the points of view that they bring, very specific points of view they bring to the table today. And then after those presentations, we would open this up for questions. So to introduce panelists, here we have Judith Cefkin with us. Welcome, Judith. Judith is a senior advisor for Burma with the U.S. State Department. She's been in this position for the past 8 months. But I should also mention that she worked as Deputy Chief of Mission of U.S. Embassy in Thailand from 2010 to 2013. And we all know this was a very critical period in opening of Burma. So she's worked on the ground on these issues, so she brings that perspective too. Judith is, career diplomat, and she has served in such places such as Mexico, Paris, Philippines, but also has served as Deputy Chief of Mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina about 10 years ago. And before she started this storied and successful career about 30 years ago in diplomatic service, Judith was a television news producer, so I hope she will forgive us and go easy on us if we've done anything wrong in preparing this event. Thank you, Judith, for being with us. Next, I would like to introduce to you Professor Christina Fink, who is teaching the practice of international affairs at the Elliott School of International Affairs. And so before this job, she has taught at different places, including Pacific and Asian Studies Department at the University of Victoria. And very interesting to me, she also taught at the International Sustainable Development Studies Institute in Thailand. I should also say for about 10 years. Professor Fink has actually also been on the implementing side. She has actually conducted various capacity building programs for Burmese civil society organizations, including women's groups. And this is an area of her current research as well, where she focuses on development in repressive states, and also gender issues in development, as well as development of civil society in ethnically diverse societies. So these are all very relevant topics to Burma, even though I'm sure Professor Fink looks at other countries as well. But she has also written very extensively about Burma, and while she says she only speaks intermediate Burmese, I've heard her converse, and to me it seemed quite fluently. with people from the country. So very glad to have you here today. Thank you. We also have John Knaus from National Endowment for Democracy with us today, who has an imposing 17 years of work experience at the National Endowment for Democracy on issues in the Southeast Asia and North Korea. And John is quite a bit of authority when it comes to Burma, and he has been traveling very extensively to Burma lately. He has great knowledge of the grassroots in Burma, what organizations are doing on the ground, what political parties are doing. He can tell you, I think, about things that will happen in Burma before anybody else would know it. And we are very, very happy.
Can do that.
Oh, he can do that too. Ong can definitely do that too. Well, we're happy to have you here today, but I do have to say we kind of have a very frightening audience for me and the panel here today, as there are such fine Burma experts in the audience, and as I told some of them, I hope they'll go easy on us today with their questions. So if you wouldn't mind, the panel will remove ourselves until the end of the poll findings presentation, and then we'll be back to discuss it. Rob and Steve, this is your cue to start.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, Julia. As you know, mentioned, Rob Barkslow, certified researcher. A survey we're going to show you today, the data was collected most of the month of January. Advancing to the next slide, technology. All interviews are conducted in-home and in person. Our sample frame was age 18 and above. This is a nationally representative system of voting age. We use a multi-stage stratified sample size that yields a confidence interval of plus or minus percent at the mid-range at the 95th confidence level. We use a local data collector. We spent a lot of time interviewing, finding the right one. This firm was very experienced. They had a very solid core team. And the mark of an IRA is very strict quality control. And we have confidence in this data. The firm, in our opinion, did a very good job, and they passed all the quality control checks easily. On the next slide, graphics. The male-female split, 50, urban-rural, 31-69, roughly in line with the available statistics. For the most part, these numbers were within an acceptable range. Now, next slide, these were our locations. We went to every single state and region for the purpose of making that analysis a bit cleaner and more significant. We've grouped these states and regions into the following zones: the plain zone and the coastal zone. Okay, we're going to start looking at the results now, looking at current developments. On the first slide, we have a battery of questions on democracy. Starting at the bottom and looking up, we read a series of statements, and we asked people if they agreed or disagreed with the statement. First, we asked, democracy is good at maintaining law and order. You can see 65% said disagreed with that. 37% strongly disagreed. Very intense number. And as I look at these slides, I'm going to always be focusing on those intense categories. I think that's a good way of really gauging public sentiment and how deeply people feel about these things. Next bar up, the economic system runs badly. A total of 69% disagree, but again, more importantly, 39% strongly disagree. When asked about democracy, indecisive and having too much squabbling, the numbers were a little bit weaker, largely because there were more undecideds at 34%, but still a total of 40% disagreed with that statement, and 29% strongly disagreed. And finally, at the top, democracies may have problems, but is better than any other form of government. You can see 76% agreed, and more importantly, 50%, half the sample, strongly agreed with that statement. So we're seeing some very solid numbers when it comes to a democratic commitment. And again, I was very impressed when I looked at these numbers at the intensity of those feelings. On the next slide, we looked at trends. We asked people about the following trends, if they've improved or gotten worse over the past year. You can see 62% felt the trend of population had increased, gotten better. We saw similar numbers at women's rights, again at 62%. Then on the bottom, this is one of the blights in the survey. We did see that 57% felt that sectarian violence had actually increased over the past year. And from what we've heard on the ground the past week, really driven probably by events of the past year. So again, good numbers aside from the sectarian violence number. And in this poll, that's probably one of the only bad numbers here. On the next slide, we asked people that if the parliamentary elections were held today, how likely is it that you would vote? You can see 89% said they would definitely vote, a very high number. Now, our experience polling around the world is that people tend to overstate their intent to vote, so the actual number probably will be much lower. But this does show that they are enthusiastic, and it does show that at this stage of the game, they certainly do intend to get out and vote. Of those who said they wouldn't, we asked a follow-up question. We asked them why that would be the case. You can see 30% said it was because they're not interested in politics. Only 2% said, I don't think the vote would care. So again, largely driven by state and not with any kind of concerns about the credibility of the elections. A little bit more on the credibility. We asked people how credible they felt the 2015 parliamentary elections will be. 33% said very. 44% said somewhat. Again, pretty good numbers. We also asked about the 2010 elections and how credible people felt they were. 53% did feel that they were credible, and 27% that they weren't. We think there might have been some confusion because in between 2010 and 2015, there was the 2012 election. So there might have been some conflation of the 2010 and 2012 elections in this number. Now we're going to look at some indicators. On the next slide, it's your typical right track, wrong track number. So you can see 88% think the country's heading in the right direction, very high. 6% said wrong direction. The next slide, we asked a follow-up question. Of those who said the country was headed in the right direction, we asked why they thought that was the case. The top answer at 35% was roads being paved and bridges being built, essentially infrastructure and development. Second was the economy at 20%. Of those who said wrong direction, 32% said it was because of poor economic conditions, and 21% said it was for sectarian violence. But again, focused on those right track numbers, this is the trend we're going to see in the poll, that the economy, particular development, driving these very positive attitudes, and they're being reflected, as we'll see later, in the government's approval numbers. So some more indicators on the next slide. These are focused mostly on the economy. On the top bar, we asked people to describe the current economic situation in Burma. 12% said it was very good. 73% said it was just good. It's a total of 85% positive, so obviously a very high number, but the number lacks intensity. Only 12% said it's very good. So even though the number's high, it's necessarily strong. We also asked people about their personal economic situation and whether or not over the past year it's improved or worsened or stayed the same. 40% did say that it improved, and 45% said that 16% said worse. Those are pretty fair. But more importantly, the next slide wrap, we asked people about the year ahead and whether or not they expected their personal economic situation to get better or worse or stay the same. Here, nearly 60% said better, 24% same, and only 2% worse. More important than any current economic indicator, always future expectations are more important. And driver of attitudes and mood, more important to driving election results. So the fact that the economy is good is important, but the fact that they think it's going to get even better in the next year is even more so. On the next slide, we asked about some top problems in the country. We asked people to name their 3 top problems. Focus now just on the first choice. 19% said unemployment, 16% ethnic or sectarian violence, 9% said high prices, 7% poverty. If you add up the economic issues, it comes to 35%. So essentially, for first choice, 35% said something about the economy, and the second top concern would have been violence at 16%. So again, we're seeing the economy emerge, again a top concern, and also another driver in these. That slide I just showed you was open-ended, and now on this next slide, we tested a series of issues that we gave them. We just tested them individually. We asked people how serious of a problem you would say that each of these issues are in Burma. You can see at the top, it's 79% saying very serious, low income, unemployment, insufficient farm aid. Really the top concerns, again, the economy. In the middle of the pack, 54%, you see further democratic reforms. As usual, these things aren't quite as important as the economic issues that we see around the world. And then towards the bottom, you can see gender discrimination, ethnic and sectarian conflict, each at 41%. Next slide has some approval numbers. And as I mentioned, people think the economy is in good shape. They think that the country's heading in the right track. They cite the economy as reasons for believing that. And now we're seeing this reflected in these approval numbers. The government is getting credit. The first bar, we asked people to rate the job that the national government is doing. 20% said very good job, and 69% said good job. When you look at the net, and by net I mean adding up all the positives and subtracting all the negatives, the government has a net of 84%, plus 84. It's a very high number. Now again, that 20% very good job lacks integrity. Overwhelmingly positive for the government. Now conversely, the next one, the approval rating of the president, you can see there's much more intensity here. 43% strongly approve of the job that he's doing, 48% somewhat approve. That's a net of plus 89, very high, and again, very intense at 43%. And then the Union Parliament, that part, the numbers are much weaker, strongly approved, somewhat approved 45, net of 60. The reason these numbers are lower because of the gray bar, the 30% that are undecided. The numbers aren't low because people don't approve of the job they're doing. They're lower because people aren't familiar with what they're doing. On the next slide, we have asked people to rate the government's performance on a number of different issues. And generally, they're a little bit lower than the overall numbers. You can see at the top, though, they have pretty good numbers on infrastructure development. 32% think they're doing a very good job. Again, a theme in the poll, the development that the government is doing is being recognized and is definitely getting benefits from it. On the next slide, these are the nets of the previous slide. So, for example, infrastructure, up all the positive and negative, at a net of 78. So you can see, generally speaking, these numbers are very high. Towards the bottom, electricity, employment, getting now into the single digits. And the only area where they were underwater, that is that more people rated them negatively than positively, would be poverty reduction, 50%. On the next slide, we are rating some institutions. And generally speaking, when you see positive numbers like this, you want to focus on the most intense categories, and you want to look at them in a relative sense. So, example, media, 39% very favorable, 43% somewhat, the highest along with the military. And it's important to note when we did the pre-test on the military, there was some pushback on the part of the respondents. Okay? We're asking what we meant by the military. Did we mean rank and file? Did we mean generals? So we instructed our data collectors to say that we meant the military as an institution. And I think in part that is reflected here in these numbers. 33% have a very favorable opinion of the military and 51% favorable. Also note the next part, the opposition and the ruling coalition had very similar numbers. 3 and 25% very favorable, and 45-51% favorable. On the next slide, we ask about the political campaigns and whether or not people would welcome contact from a political party. You can see 91% said that they would. Of those, we asked a follow-up question asking what type of contact they would welcome. 84% said neighborhood meeting, 84% said visit at home, 79% attend rally, approach public place, 64%. These numbers are very important for IRI because of all the political party trainings that we do. In most countries, campaigns of rallies and putting up posters, we try to get them to focus more on direct contact. And having numbers like this, saying that 84% would welcome a visit at home or 64% would welcome being approached in a public place, helps us convince them to engage in more direct voter contact and less visibility. Now we're going to start looking at some of these issues in more depth. These pie graphs are about the constitutional amendment issue. We asked people if they supported the repeal of the current amendment that bans someone from becoming president if they married a foreigner. You can see 54% said yes, 32% said no. Then we added a bit of we put it in context, explaining that Aung San Suu Kyi is prevented from becoming president with the current constitution, and asking now to know that so they support amending it so that she would be able to run. You can see there's a 10-point jump, 64% now support amending the Constitution, only 21% opposed. So that 10-point jump and some of the demographics that we saw the biggest increases with shows that the degree of education still has to be done on the issue if the NLD is going to maximize their vote in a referendum. The next slide has to do with provincial autonomy and more centralization. We asked respondents if they support giving states and regions more autonomy and power so they can make their own decisions, or if they thought that all such power decisions should be centralized and made by the government. 35% supported more autonomy compared to the 57% who preferred that power be more centralized. In that box there, you can crosstabs on the issue. You can see the centralized numbers were high in the plain zone, as would be expected. Also with the Bamar ethnicity at 62%. And notice that the non-Bamar ethnicity split essentially 50-50 on that issue. Now, it's important to note that some of these ethnic groups had such small numbers in the same that we couldn't look at them individually, which is why I grouped them here. Obviously, some, for example, Khan and the captain are much more likely to want more provincial autonomy. Some of the ethnic groups much less so. So that non-Bamar ethnicity is all-encompassing, and a lot of those feelings, one way or the other, has been averaged out. But in generally still prefer autonomy much more so than the Bamar, which is what we expect. On the next slide, these next couple of pie graphs have to do with corruption. We asked people how prevalent corruption was in Burma. 25% said prevalent, somewhat. 50% said somewhat. So not very good numbers. On the next slide, they do recognize the government is making an effort. 30% describe themselves as very satisfied with the government's efforts to fight corruption, and 42% said they were somewhat satisfied. So again, corruption is a problem, but they do recognize that the government is trying to do something about it. This next slide, we asked people, in their opinion, people in Burma were more or less free to express their opinions, or afraid not to express their opinions. You can see 33%, a third, said that most are afraid. 20% said some. 35% said they're not afraid. And 7% said for the most part no one is afraid. Certainly not, essentially split 50-50, not great numbers in that 33% most are afraid number. What is interesting, though, is when I ran the crosstabs on this poll, that 33% didn't hesitate to give their opinion on any number of controversial issues. So I think that was probably more than talking about other people than talking about themselves. I do think there is a fear factor baked into these numbers to some extent. We would expect that in any poll that we conducted in a non-partisan environment. but I don't believe that it was overriding concern and that it impacted the results in a very bit large way. Looking now at some political parties. Now, these next couple of slides, we read a series of statements, and we asked people which political party best reflected the sentiment of that statement. Here, the blue bars are NLD. The red bars are USDP. So you can see they support women, they have young leaders, they support democratic reforms. NLD has a serious advantage, 57, 52, 48%. They care about people like me. See, the numbers now are starting to get close, but they still do 44, 35. Usually a question like this we've seen in our polling around the world is a pretty good indicator of a ballot test. This is the sort of question that does decide elections. Moving on, 42.5, NLD advantage on their policies help the poor. 40% selected NLD on they are trustworthy. Another 40% on strong leadership. Good policy, NLD 37%. And then on this slide, they fight corruption was the only category where USDP was ahead of NLD at 37%. On the next slide, we asked about a number of issues. One, we asked people which political parties would do a better job on the following. You can see that improving education and improving health care were very close, 41% to 37 on improving education, and health care was split 38-38. Now we're starting to see the red bar above the blue. We're seeing USDP starting to pick up steam. They led at 39% on ending ethnic conflict, improving the economy at 40%, 43% strengthening the nation, and then a whopping 49% improving security. Again, constant theme of the poll, we're seeing them getting credit for economy and for development, improving security, strengthening the nation, improving the economy, all things that are driving their approval numbers and putting them in the position that they are. On the next slide, we asked people what the most important factor was when they are choosing a political party. You can see 36% chose party leader and 34% said party platform. Candidate quality, 12%, ethnicity 4, family ties 1, don't know was 13. So again, party leader and party platform in particular is something that IRI really focuses on in its trainings, trying to get them to develop more message-oriented campaigns rather than just serving as vehicles for party leaders. On these next pie graphs, we asked people if there were two candidates, they were campaigning for the same office, and they had exactly the same qualifications, which would they prefer? And the first was man or woman. You can see 48% said man, 24% said woman, no preference in that 25%. Young or old, young person 41, older person 34, no preference 20. You can see essentially no difference there. And then 19% said they would prefer a new person to politics, and 55% said they would prefer someone who's been around for a while. And so now we're moving into media usage. These next couple of slides just inquire about some of the main media that impact opinion in Burma. On the first slide, we asked people where they most likely get their news and information. 35% said radio. Friends and family was second at 26, and TV third at 23. Radio and friends and family over TV is unusual in our polling, so it's something we definitely are very interested in. Of radio, one of the notes we made for the next survey, we're going to parse that out. There's radio as we know it, and then radio in terms of shortwave radio, which apparently is also very popular here. So we're going to see what we can do about further defining that number. On the bottom pie graphs, we asked people first how often they read news magazines and newspapers. You can see the largest response was less than once a month at 68%. TV and radio, naturally, they watch and listen to that much more. 42% said they watch or listen to radio and TV almost every day, 27% once a week, 7% once a month, and less than once a month was 24%. On the next slide, 40% said they owned a mobile phone. 59% said they didn't. Note on this, we did say household and not individual, which is one reason why that number might be so high at 40%. The other thing, a note we made for the next survey, our understanding is a lot of people may own mobile phones but use them for games. So we're going to refine this question and ask about whether or not they actually possess a SIM card to see if we can tighten up that number to get a more accurate read. And then finally, the Internet. You can see 73% said they never use the Internet. Of those who did say they used it at least at some point, we asked a follow-up question, where do they regularly access the Internet from? You can see 56% said cell phone, 29% said home, 7% Internet cafe, 5% work, and 4% home with friends and family. So that's the last slide. Again, just some key points. Obviously, the economy, very important. That is something that we see in most of our polling around the world. Usually the elites are focused on democratic reforms or election reforms and things of that nature, and people are always more concerned about the bread and butter issues. As we've been here this week, that's one of the things we're really focused on communicating. You saw the numbers on the economy, the numbers on right track, wrong track. Clearly, people think that the country's heading in the right direction and things are getting better. They think the economy is going to get better still. And those approval numbers really do reflect that. The government is definitely getting credit for what it's done and for the position of the economy, and that should make the election in 2015 very interesting. So with that, Julia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Excellent. And pretty good connection given that you're calling in from Burma. Thank you. So if I may invite panel to come back up here and to help us digest this data a little bit, but also to, this data is, of course, a snapshot in time. It was taken in January to help put all of this in a little bit of context. I meant to first go ahead and ask John Knaus to tell us there's been, we've seen now from this poll that, and I think for the first time now we can definitely say with high level of confidence that there's no alternative to democracy in Burma as far as Burmese people are concerned. And we also see that they have ranked, government high on the reforms that have taken place so far, but clearly they would like to see more. So the question is, there's some sense that the reality on the ground is such that the reforms have slowed down, if not even stalled. So can you give us your view on this particular question?
Sure. Well, first of all, I do want to say that the reform process has been remarkable so far. The fact that IRI has been able to hold a poll when you're supported by sort of the dreaded NED and some other people is really a huge step forward. But I do think that particularly in the last few months, we've seen signs that the reform process really has slowed down, if not completely stalled. I think a couple of examples of that are the association law that was originally put to Parliament recently by a group of civil society groups that came together. It was a really positive law and a really positive step. Unfortunately, the law hasn't been passed, and there are rumors that they are going to add provisions that will actually punish civil society rather than protect it. I think that the ceasefire process that's been going on has really slowed down remarkably. The government has wanted to have a ceasefire in place for a long time, and it keeps dragging on. It was supposed to be November, then it was going to be January, now it might be April, and some are saying the summer. Then even in a place where there has been a lot of positive steps in the media, you're starting to see signs that things are slowing down as well. There's a journal, an editor and 4 reporters from the Unity Journal are on trial right now for reporting about an alleged chemical weapons factory at a military installation under the Official Secrets Act. And it's just this has sent a sort of a chilling effect throughout the media recently. Also, some of the exile media that have returned were originally given 6-month or year-long visas are now being told that they're only going to be getting month-long visas, which is another way to restrict the free media. But I think most troubling, actually, is the anti-Muslim violence that's occurred over the last couple of years. It began in Arakan State, but it has really spread throughout the country. Most recently, we again see it in Arakan State. We've seen MSF, Doctors Without Borders, being removed from the state because they gave aid to victims of a massacre that the UN said killed at least 40 people, and the government has denied that the massacre ever occurred. We also are seeing, last week, we've seen attacks on a number of NGO offices in Sittwe. And I think that this is just showing how tense the situation is in Arakan State, particularly with the census that began on Sunday, and the question of how the Rohingya are going to be identified or not identified, or Bengali, and all of those sorts of things. I think even more troubling, though, is the fact that the violence is spread outside of Arakan State, and you're starting to see how it's being connected to politics as well. There was a letter that President Thein Sein sent at the end of February to the parliament, asking them to draft a interfaith marriage law, which has been one of the big things that the 969 movement has been pushing for. It just shows that at least Thein Sein is giving in to some of the pressure of the monks right now. Also, you have the monks themselves campaigning against Article 59F, or the amendment of Article 59F, which is the amendment which would allow Suu Kyi to run for president. And it just shows that there's now becoming a nexus, or at least they're working towards the same ends. Finally, I'm going to read my concluding paragraph that I wrote out just because I want to make sure that I get it right. But with the election scheduled next year, these disturbing trends only threaten to intensify as various political forces battle for power. For the government, a victory by the USDP in 2015 would mean a consolidation of power and a reaffirmation of the so-called seven-step roadmap to democracy, even if there are not significant constitutional changes. For the opposition, a victory by the NLD and its allies similar to the 1990 elections and the 2012 by-elections could demonstrate the political will of the people for the first time in Burma, but without an overturning of the political order in the country. In essence, power without legitimacy for the regime, or legitimacy without power for the opposition. Those are the stakes in today's Burma.
On that wonderful prospect that John leaves us with. And also, just going back, I think even in your presentation, you do mention the sectarian violence as a huge threat, and especially now with census that is started that can just nothing else but ignite it. And having seen in this poll that actually 57% majority of people living in Burma say that the sectarian violence has worsened. So this is not only, clearly not only anymore just isolated in the Arakan state. So we have this as a huge issue. Of course, the census that has just begun has opened up some issues to be discussed. And then John has laid out this very interesting perspective about choices that are ahead of us. But can you tell us, Professor Fink, how do you see some of the major developments, such as those, having potential to positively or negatively impact democratic development in Burma ahead of 2015 elections?
I'll start with the census, since that is going on right now, and it's been very controversial. And I think there are two key issues with the census. One is the number of Muslims in the population in Burma or Myanmar, which may come out to be much higher than many people in the country think it is, and that could feed into the anti-Muslim sentiment that's been growing in the country. And the second is the issue of what is the percentage of ethnic minorities in the country, in the population, and specifically for different populations, what are their numbers outside the different ethnic states which might be named after them? For instance, the Mon population in Karen State, because that's going to affect their political representation in the ethnic state governments. So these are important issues that will come out later this year. Related to that is the peace process with the armed ethnic nationalist groups. And as John said, this has been a much more fraught process than the government initially expected and has moved much more slowly than some people wanted. But I think there is still pressure for that to move forward, not only because the government wants to see a national ceasefire, but also because the parliament is very active, or very eager to get involved and be active in the political decision-making that would follow on the results of a ceasefire. But on the other hand, there have been concerns about the degree to which the military is really committed to engaging in the ceasefire process, and also specific disagreements about how the ethnic nationalist armies might or might not be integrated into a Union of Myanmar armed force. In addition, in the coming year, the Parliament will consider a range of proposed amendments to the Constitution, and we can group these around 4 main issues. One is whether to change Article 59F, which John mentioned, which currently makes it impossible for Aung San Suu Kyi to become the president, because as president, you cannot be married to somebody who's not a citizen of Burma, but also your children and their spouses must be citizens of the country. That's a key demand for the NLD, obviously, to change that provision. But also the NLD is very interested in reducing the role of the military in politics generally in the country, and specifically in reducing the number of military MPs in the parliament. So right now that's 25%, and the military has made it clear that at this time they're not willing to consider a reduction in that number, although privately some people have said that in the future they might be willing to reduce that number. Another key issue is whether to change the procedure for amending the Constitution, which currently requires that more than 75% of the members of Parliament agree to an amendment, which obviously effectively gives the military veto power over any amendments, but also on any significant changes. After it were passed by the Parliament, it would then need to go to a nationwide referendum, and more than 50% of eligible voters would need to approve that change. And interestingly, in February, Shui Man, who's the Speaker of the lower house, said that amending this provision should be a priority for the Parliament. A fourth proposed amendment is to devolve some decision-making power to the ethnic states and the regions. And interestingly, this seems to be the area that's emerging as the one with the most consensus. Although I think that it's fair to say that the Burman stakeholders would advocate for much more moderate reforms in terms of how much power is devolved to the ethnic states, and that may not satisfy some of the ethnic actors who are involved. Also in the next 18 months, the USDP will be likely to try to address its internal divisions, because Shui Man, who's the Speaker of the lower house and has announced that he would like to run for president, has used the Parliament to really go after the president. And this is surprising because they're from the same party. So obviously the USDP has its own internal party building to do in the next 18 months. Also, we're going to see who's going to announce their candidacy for president. Right now we have Aung San Suu Kyi and Shui Man, but people have speculated that perhaps President Thein Sein will in fact decide to run, although he has said earlier that he wouldn't. And there's also speculation that Min Aung Hlaing, the commander-in-chief of the military, may want to be the military's candidate for president. And it's important to understand that people don't directly elect the president in Myanmar. Instead, the parliament elects the president, and the upper house, the elected members of the upper house choose one candidate, the elected members of the lower house choose one candidate, and the military members from both houses choose one candidate. And then there's a vote on those 3 candidates. The top vote getter will become the president, and the other 2 will become the vice president. So that means that there will be a military representative who is at least a vice president in the next government. But regardless of who becomes president or which party comes out on top, I think that you will see certainly the parties and the presidential candidates trying to convince voters that, in fact, they have done the best on economic policy, or they will do better than the other candidates in terms of being able to make life better for the ordinary Burmese citizen. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fink. And now, given that we've raised a lot of very complex issues, and we see what Burmese want, I think would all be very interesting to hear how State Department prioritizes different issues for engagement in Burma. What are your priorities? And now, just having seen this data, do you also think that those priorities somewhat or to some extent correspond to what ordinary Burmese want?
Thank you. First of all, thank you to IRI for its work. First point, I really would like to say that this poll, the results don't in any way reflect the U.S. government's position. Let's be very clear. But I think that this IRI research does really offer some interesting perspectives. And to any people of Burma that might be listening, will be listening to this, what I'd like to say is that it is your democratic right to have it. And so I really applaud the fact that people in Burma are happy. There's lots of quotes, famous quotes on democracy. One that I thought was sort of apt for this discussion. To give here's democracy. One, because it admits variety, and two, criticism. So I think this poll is a perfect. Oh, I'm sorry. I hope more or less people heard. Okay, great. Okay. So one, because it admits variety, and two, because it permits criticism. So this poll shows, of course, a wide variety of opinions, and it offers people the chance to express support or to express criticism of policies, of leaders, and of institutions. Well, it's true that Burma is at a very important phase of its reform effort, and that, as others have said, it has made some dramatic changes, but that it does face formidable challenges. And from the U.S. government, speaking for the U.S. government, what I'd like to say is that we are committed to supporting Burma along its reform path, and we know it will not be easy. But as Americans, we pride ourselves on our strong work ethic, and so that we really are sort of committed for the long haul, for the effort that it's going to take to, work with Burmese people down this path of reform. And I'd like to just remind you all of a quote from the speech that President Obama gave at Yangon University in November 2012, which is that the road ahead will be marked by huge challenges, and there will be those who resist the forces of change. But we're determined to work closely with Burma's reformers to see the process through. Let me talk briefly a little bit about sort of the key priorities for our engagement with Burma. And the first is the peace process, that we see the national reconciliation, achieving stability and peace and peaceful coexistence as absolutely critical for the country to go forward, for democracy and economic development to flourish. And I will say on this note that we are a little more optimistic than what John expressed about where the process is. I think the fact that it has been slower than maybe was predicted or announced is not necessarily a bad thing, because the parties, the government, and the ethnic armed groups that are negotiating are dealing with some really difficult issues. And I think if there were a rush to an agreement, it might not represent a real, deep commitment and understanding to what this agreement represents. So we think the momentum is still positive. It seems that at regular intervals they're meeting. It was really, unprecedented, historic step forward for the ethnic armed groups to come together and to form a coordinating committee. And they're meeting regularly. They're, drawing up joint platforms. They're speaking with the United Front, and also, meeting regularly with the government. And I think that just recently there was a round that took place that also included representatives from the military, from Parliament. So sort of broadening the base, the stakeholders they're bringing into the discussion. So we still are cautiously optimistic. It's on the right track. and that we hope that soon, of course, it will produce an agreement. I know that the plan or the desire is to start first with a nationwide ceasefire agreement, and then from that launch the political dialogue, which will be, of course, the much tougher and more important step towards a durable peace. So we are working closely with all parties. We're in regular dialogue with all parties, encouraging this dialogue to continue to go forward. And we're also, exploring ways, once there's a nationwide ceasefire, we can bring more resources to the table to support confidence building efforts. So, of course, USAID is front and center in that effort. The second priority, of course, is just continuing the democratic reform to help the country go forward, to become a well-governed state that is inclusive, that's accountable, that's responsive to people, and which promotes freedom and protects human rights. Third area of focus for us is economic reform to help support economic growth that will benefit all regions and all segments of society to improve livelihoods. And we heard, of course, a lot in the poll, and of course this is traditional. Any country, any society it's the bread and butter issues. How is my life really affected? We want to see there to be tangible progress on that front. Another area of focus, also not to forget, a lot of our focus is very much internally focused to Burma's transition, Burma's reform, but also we want Burma to emerge as an active, reliable, responsible international partner, which contributes to regional and global security and prosperity. So we support these goals through a number of tools, a number of policy tools, through our engagement and through our assistance programs. We are seeking to particularly put emphasis on building foundations for democracy through a lot of focus on building institutions, and support for civil society is absolutely fundamental. We absolutely agree that the 2015 election will be a key test for Burma's democracy. For that reason, we are putting a lot of focus currently, particularly through our assistance programs, in capacity building work to provide a basis for the various institutions and actors that will have key roles in the election to play their roles and to help ensure a free and fair election. And that includes working with the Election Commission, Union Election Commission. It includes work with political parties. It includes work with civil society. And it includes work with media, which all have, of course, very key roles to play in the election. And we agree that polling is a really important, useful tool to support this electoral process. It will help the political actors build their election campaigns, their platforms. It also will inform public views and of the attitudes of their fellow citizens. And it, I think that so that IRR, with the support of USAID, which has managed a plan to to conduct this poll is really, very, very important. So I'll just repeat one more time that the United States does not endorse specific results from this poll, but we do recognize that the value of the polls to the democratic process in any country. And so we hope in this case that political leaders will use this data to better understand public attitudes and to be responsive to their constituents, and we hope that this will help foster transparency and to establish a political system that truly reflects the will of the Burmese people.
Thank you, Judith. And we're used to it, so it doesn't hurt too much that State Department is not endorsing the results of IRI polls. But I would just like to ask now that we open this up to questions from the audience. We do have floating mics around, so please raise your hand. We still do have our pollster and country director on the line, so if you have specific questions for the panel or for either one of them, please go ahead.
Hi, it's Kelly Curry from Project 2049. This question really is mostly for Rob, I guess, and it's the question is about the kind of baseline questioning about the terms that you used in the polling, and things like the words democratization and corruption. And do you feel when you developed the questions that there was enough of an understanding of what these words mean, and when you talk about constitutional reform, what that involves, and how and why there maybe weren't questions, or if there were, why you haven't highlighted them, about that dig into these issues a little more deeply, given the lack of experience that most Burmese would have had answering polling questions about these particular issues in this particular way?
Sure, no, I'd be happy to answer that. First of all, this is part of an ongoing research cycle. This is our first quantitative survey. We're going to be doing some focus groups. The focus groups will be probing some of the qualitative issues that we couldn't really get at in a poll. I'm definitely trying to build on these results, and then we'll be later in the year fielding another poll. So we view our polling as part of this entire process, and something that we refine as we go. Specifically to your questions on some of the terms used, we spend a lot of time working with the interpreters, exactly how they're going to translate these words into Burmese. We, at the same time, though, we don't want to give our data collectors too much leeway. For the first poll, we'd much rather people just say, if they don't we mean by provincial autonomy, we'd much rather have the undecided responses. Polling works only if the instrument is standardized. Obviously, in-person, in-home interviews, that's difficult to maintain. So we try not to put too much context into the words, especially for the first one, because I view undecided, or I don't know, what that word means, as a valuable data point in and of itself. We have to be careful when we provide context that we don't turn context into a push, where we're pushing people, towards one response or another. So again, it's part of to be pretty neutral in the first one, looking at these results, refining them in the qualitative, and then, we definitely would probe more, say, about corruption. Exactly what do you mean by corruption? We certainly would probe more, depending on where we are in the constitutional referendum process, but definitely probe more about their attitudes with that. But we treat the first one mostly as a baseline, and I think, for the goals that we set out with this poll, I think that we've met them. And just one final point, we obviously do pre-tests, and again, another round of refining on the questionnaire and the survey, if there's any confusion. For the most part, a little bit of refinement, but people understood generally what we were getting at. We had a very low refusal rate, again, another good sign. And then we always debrief the data collectors, the enumerators afterwards. And for the most part, they said that people were very open with their opinions. They were quite chatty. The interviews lasted longer than we anticipated that they would. And so, for the most part, there wasn't, we didn't really have too much of a problem with any of those areas that you raised.
Hey, Rob, it's Brian Joseph from the NED. I
Hey,
guess
Brian.
This is primarily for Rob, but I mean, if any of the panelists have an opinion, I'd be interested in what they think. One is, it strikes me as looking at the poll results, and first, it's phenomenal to actually have data on Burma, because up till this point, we've really been dealing with well-informed analysts based on lots and lots of personal information, but very little substantive information. With the exception of the by-elections and the 1990 election results gave a sort of a sweep to the National League for Democracy, whereas if I were looking at your polling and assuming that you know things that aren't in this poll, you see the NLD's numbers much closer to the USDP. So in other words, if you're just looking at the poll data you presented, it looks like a tie, or very, very close if you were to do a horse race type question. So the question is, do you have any sense of how the NLD's numbers went down from 42 to, 95% of the by-election seats they swept, to if you had an election today, the results are much, much closer? Am I reading this correctly? And if so, what contributes to it? The second question is, on the opposition, I'm not sure I even understand anymore what that means in the context of Burma. Before, it was clearly rooted in the National League for Democracy. After the Saffron Revolution, you had the monks, and John and Christina brought this into the discussion. But did you get a sense from the polling, or if anyone has an opinion, in Burma today, does the opposition still stand for the National League for Democracy?
Brian, you broke up a little bit. If you could just repeat the first part of your question, or let me just repeat it back to you. Did I catch the gist of it? You wanted to get a sense of NLD versus USDP in terms of the ballot test?
Yeah, but I was saying that without the ballot test, because I know that's a little bit premature, but I was just surprised in the numbers in the past when the argument would be if the NLD, anytime the NLD was put to the test, meaning 1990 and 2012, they won overwhelmingly. But your data is suggesting to me today that they would no longer win overwhelmingly. And the question is, what led to, do you know from the polling, what contributed to a more equal playing field or a more balanced outcome if you actually had an election today?
Sure. What I can tell you, again, just staying within the confines of the data, the improvement in the economy, the right track numbers, the development, is clearly reflected in those approval numbers. We've given this presentation, I think, now 16 times this week alone, and most notably to Aung San Suu Kyi herself. And she acknowledged that that's what's been happening over the past couple of years. They've been delivering, the economy's been good, and it's been bolstering their position. I still think that NLD is beloved. Certainly, the lady, as they call her, is beloved. But from what I've heard from our Burma team, what I saw today when we briefed USDP, both the party and then Shui Man's guys in the parliament, they're very well organized, certainly well resourced, much more politically minded. They're political operatives, not activists. We did the poll presentation and they said, all right, well, how do we win? We answered the question. We talked about different campaign things. No, seriously, tell us more. How can we win? I mean, very, very pointed, very goal-oriented. Organization matters for a lot. Machine matters for a lot in an election. And you may very well see, right now the numbers to the election are very high. In a high turnout election, machine doesn't matter as much. But if this, for whatever reason, turns into a lower turnout election, you may see the machine be able to grind out some turnout and actually outperform their poll numbers. So generally speaking, I think that, within the numbers, I think it's just a matter of things getting better. And again, it's something that we've seen consistently around the world in all of our polling, even back home in America. The extent to which a good economy can certainly impact political fortunes. And, like I said, of all the people we briefed, again, there was a lot of reinforcement of our numbers and what we've been saying, most notably from Aung San Suu Kyi herself when she said, yes, this is exactly what's happening. And then she asked when the next poll was going to be.
And if I can just add to that, Brian, I think we were looking into, going back to 1990 elections, looking at, we were trying to find the actual data on voting percentages. It's a little bit difficult because of the first past the post system, so that somebody can sweep, but actually, the difference in percentages can still be small. And I think back then it was, I'm forgetting now, but it was maybe 21%. I mean, they were it was about 20% maybe overall difference in number of votes, even though the parliamentary seats were overwhelming. Cool. Oh yeah, can I have a panelist just add to this? Yes, please.
Yeah, I think that there are two reasons as well why the USDP numbers are high. I think that for most people under the former regime, they didn't see the government doing anything for them or taking any interest in them. And I think that one question about, do you feel like the party is interested in you? And I think people do feel that today under the current government, the government does feel a sense of accountability or responsibility to the population, and that's been welcomed. And I also think that the NLD has been primarily focused on enabling Aung San Suu Kyi to become the president, with the understanding, I think, in their minds that then they would institute policies that would be good for the people. But people maybe haven't seen that the NLD is really driven by its own interests in making things better for the people. They haven't seen that directly. And as to your question about who is the opposition, I just wanted to point out again that I think it's very interesting that the Parliament has tried to craft itself as a body that's in opposition to the executive branch, and that all the members, Shui Man has very carefully tried to create an atmosphere in Parliament where we're all in this together and we're all united as a body in opposition to the executive branch. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that evolves as we move into the election period.
Yulia, can I add one more thing?
Go ahead.
I also wanted to pick up on something one of the panelists said in the introduction about how violence and sectarian violence is starting to become political. And I think that ties in nicely with what Brian had just asked. We have heard repeatedly this week that is the case. The government is using it in particular to polarize the Bamar vote. Some NLD supporters have told us that they feel they're losing support because of this, that some of their diehard supporters are actually falling for this ploy. That could be another reason if their position is being weakened. As one of the panelists pointed out, because of the polarization along ethnic lines.
Hi, Rob. This is Sugunor Navon. Thank you. This is excellent data. One of the interesting things, to get back to Kelly's point, which I found striking, was on page 13, corruption. And that the question, what are the three biggest problems facing Burma as a whole? Corruption, it was like 1%. But when you think about unemployment, when you think about high prices, poverty, education, poor health care, no electricity, bad transportation, the whole gamut. I mean, for those of us who sort of visited Burma, you talk to anyone, the first thing the cab driver tells you is how corrupt, everything is. So it was interesting that it ranks so low, and I don't know whether it's because of the definitions that we use, but if you could just unpack that, I'd be interested. And I sort of am going back to what Kelly said. I mean, do people understand that these things are kind of linked? Thank you.
Sure. Well, there's nothing in the data as to whether or not corruption is linked to unemployment, these other things. We ask questions several different ways because we get different responses. For example, in the sum zero question, like, give me the one thing that bothers you the most, economic issues are going to come out on top. Obviously, they're not really making the leap to the point that maybe corruption is the reason why there's unemployment or inflation or all these other things. So that's why you see it down the list. But then when you ask about it directly, you notice we also have that ladder scale where we're asking people about all the questions individually, issues individually. Do you think that development is a very serious problem, et cetera? Again, we ask individually because we know that, in the sum zero question like an open-ended, give me the one thing that bothers you the most, we're not going to get a full picture of the problems that plague the country. Now, on the issue, we're confident with the Burmese translation. And one thing that we've heard from a couple of people, they think that maybe in some of the more remote areas, and again, this is anecdotal, in some of the more remote areas, corruption is such a daily part of life, they don't really necessarily see it as corruption, kind of like if I want to do this thing, then I'm going to have to pay this guy. Because we did, probe some of these corruption numbers anecdotally with the data collectors and with the local staff and try to figure out, did we use the right word? Again, we wanted to sort of establish some baselines. There's only so many questions we can put on a survey. But in the future, we do want to sort of flesh this corruption issue out. What do you mean by corruption? What's the worst type of corruption? Was it bribes? Things of that nature, putting together different ladder scales. We did similar batteries of tests in Pakistan, first asking some baselines, and then in follow-up surveys, really trying to parse it out and figure out what they mean by corruption and what really the problem is.
I really appreciate for the IRI to do the pools, but the pools I mean, I always listen the people feeling, the basic civilian feeling, because the reporter to make the pool there's no reference for the visit civilian. Because they said the Pooh said that the Udain saying government did a lot of job. They said that, but I don't think so, because there are a lot of riot in the Rakhine state. They can prevent it, but they did not do that. And then other situation, they use a lot of military support, but they did not use the education. But the suppose they put that they use a lot of money for the education and medication, but they did not do that. So I think the Pooh did not reflect for the civilian feeling. I don't know, the report, he asks other who people, maybe the people for the government. At the same time, USDC, because of the region government support the USDP, and they did not get any support from the government. Most of them, the member are civilian, basic civilian, so they have to struggle themselves. So even they want to support the country, they cannot support it. They are stay in the jail, they are fighting to get democracy, and then the government stay taking the land. They said that's not, they did not do that. Only others could do that. They didn't have the land from the people. They take the land from the Mont. They take the land from the Burma. But the government did not do that. They only do the committee. The committee will do to clear the situation. So the Pooh did not show that one. So I think I really appreciate IRI to do the Pooh, but I thought I am the exile government, former exile government of the wife, and then I always listen the new. I know the feeling of the people. I know the feeling of the basic civilian people. That's me. The Pooh did not reflect the basic civilian. Thank you.
To give any comments on the methodology that was used or the reactions you've been getting in the preliminary briefings in the field?
Sure, absolutely. Obviously, any kind of survey research in a non-permissive environment has its limits, but IRI over the years has developed some very stringent techniques, ones that was proven to work. We feel very confident with the data that we have. And as I mentioned, we've done this polling presentation now 16 times. We've gotten some very positive feedback from people who don't necessarily like what we're saying, but they understand that it's true. Like I said, Aung San Suu Kyi herself recognizes what's been happening over the past couple of months, recognizes what the government is doing. I don't want to say too much about private conversations, but she, is strategizing how to move forward and what she can do to combat this. And again, just let me go into a little bit more detail about how we constructed our sample. As I mentioned, it was a multi-stage stratified probability sample. We used a complex sample using several different sampling techniques. IRI always uses clusters of 10 to minimize the design effect. So our 3,000 sample poll was distributed into 300 different sampling points. These were stratified by region and state. We used the probability proportionate to size method to select our townships. We were further stratified by urban and rural locations. We use simple random sampling to select the different tracks. They're largely the same size, so we can get away with that. Again, using PPS to select our PSUs. We use a systematic random sample method to select the households and then the Kish grid within the household. We perform statistical checks on the file when we get it back to make sure that things haven't been faked. We have regular reports from the field. Again, IRI's hallmark really is its quality control. And our local team, Steve's team here on the ground and me from afar, we're very much on top of the process, knowing the importance of this poll and knowing the attention that it was going to get. We are very confident that we put forward, and if we weren't, we wouldn't have done so.
One more question. So,
Why are you going to use this results?
How will we use the results? And
Yes,
can you also ask your question? Maybe it's similar. So let's see. Maybe Rob can respond. Okay, great. That would be great to hear, actually.
Only this one question and another two questions. The OCC already, commented this pool is not, reflect Burmese ordinary citizen. Also, the democratic force of outside and inside. I know that I sleep only a few hours. I'm on the Facebook. I know what is a real people opinion. If you put on the Facebook, you will get all the wrong direction. President thinks they not get fully support from our Burmese people. Also, the already USTP parallel with Anna Lee is not. I don't think so, because the OCC also mentioned a lot of land grabbing, a lot of political crisis going on, especially all United States and the whole government. Of course, all expertise and all people want to change Burma. I still feel this. Burma stay in the middle. It's not progress at all. Of course, progressing a little bit, but still oppressed, deep oppressed, and still lying the whole national level.
Also hear the comment here from somebody who was elected in 1990.
Yes, I was elected in 1990 election, and Burma has some experience, not only in 1990 election, but also in the UNU times in 1960. The UNU won landslide victory from others, their party who is favored by the military, And the same happened in 1990 elections. The Burmese people see the military as something outsider, And when they support one party, they don't like it. They don't like that party, That is a sentiment of the Burmese people. We have experienced in that time also in 1990. So we cannot say like what happened. USDP is seen all the time as military-favored party, and they have to shed that image very quick and very really. Otherwise, things can happen. And one thing I am very much worried about is what Aung San Suu Kyi said. 2015 elections can be free, but not fair. So when we talk about election, we talk about free and fair election. So without the amendment of 2008, we will not have that. We will not have that. Even when Aung San Suu Kyi was this, and so the military has to reform. What happened now is that there is no reform in military. Min Aung Hlaing said very clearly, 2008 Constitution they have to protect. 2008 Constitution is made by the military and for the military. We have to take it very clearly, seriously, and everything we are talking about, peace and ceasefire, are connected with it. So please be very careful on that part of our friends and people who wants to help us on that part, on that question very much. Thank you.
Thank you for the end, Steve. If you could, I think this would be the right, actually, that's the right question. Thank you so much. It's a great question for the end. And Steve, if you could tell us, how will IRI actually use this data now, except for sharing it in a public way? How do we intend to use it in our programs in the field?
Sure. As I think Mark mentioned early on, and Yulia alluded to, is with support from USAID, we are working on an elections and political processes assistance project where we've been engaging political parties primarily at the local level and been talking about things like constituent outreach and local party development, role of political parties, and so what we'll be doing, and we've also recently launched a training of the trainers program where we are working with kind of master trainers within political parties so that they can go out and train their own party members. And so we'll be using the data that we've garnered from this poll to supplement in those trainings. And so that's primarily will be the use of the polling data, is to try to help parties use this information to improve their constituent outreach, to develop issue-based messages, and eventually run issue-based campaigns.
And if I can, to give us a statement. Okay.
I come here and listen about present situation in our country. So let me tell you about our country. Now, our country is under the military dictators, and they don't stop the civil war up to now. So what is the meaning of our country? The meaning of our country is lawless country. Our country is lawless country. There is no lawful country. That's why the coming election is, I think, it does not be a fair election. They will be fighting everybody. The people are never afraid of our country. The people I see here, the people is Burma people afraid, but our people will never be afraid to fight the ruling people, because our people has no weapons, no support here. Our people are trying to get democracy, but especially we want weapons and supporting from another country. That's why we will be fighting the ruling class, especially the military dictators in our country, not so long. I think the general election will be fair or unfair. This is the real answer: is unfair election. Thank you very much for talking about the election in our country. I don't want to talk a long time about the military dictators. The military dictators are same throughout the world, not in our country, but also throughout the world. Thank you very much for talking about my dictatorship in our country.
And thank you for your comment. And as someone actually who I'm very fortunate to do this work now. I come from Serbia, and I was in Serbia at the time that Serbia was an authoritarian state. So I really, I think I can understand at least the part of your sentiment that you have. And now, yes, I am American, but I want you to know that there are other nations, not only America, that will stand with you in these efforts to democratize Burma. Everybody has this as a priority, and a lot of countries are in there and trying to help. So thank you all for coming today, really so very much to have this discussion. And to our panelists, thank you so much for preparing and for giving us your very insightful thoughts. And I hope we can continue to do things together. And thank you, Steve and Rob, for staying up so late. You can go to sleep now.